Welcome to Best Ever, the show where we explore how effective self-management creates the foundation for positive leadership outcomes. I'm Scott Eblin, and in every episode, I sit down with notable leaders to uncover the routines, mindset shifts, and strategies that have helped them lead at the highest level, and the difference that's made for their organizations, families, and communities. This episode of Best Ever is a little bit different because I'm getting the opportunity to speak with one of my clients from almost 20 years ago. When I coached Vivek Shah in 2007, he was the 34-year-old president of the Fortune Money Group at Time Incorporated, back when just about every CEO's goal was to appear on the cover of Fortune magazine. Today, Vivek is the president and CEO of Ziff Davis, the NASDAQ-listed digital media powerhouse that has grown from around $20 million a year in revenue when he engineered a purchase of the company to $1.4 billion in annual revenues today. In this episode of Best Ever, I catch up with Vivek to talk about what he's learned about placing small bets that yield big results and the physical, mental, and relational routines that have yielded great outcomes for him, both professionally and personally. If you're a senior leader, I think you'll find this conversation with Vivek fascinating. And if you're a rising leader, I think you'll learn a lot from Vivek. So either way, I think you'll enjoy this episode of Best Ever. Vivek Shah, welcome to Best Ever.
It's great to be here, Scott.
Hey, thank you. Thanks so much for being here. So, if people do a cursory Google search on you, which I did, I went beyond cursory, I'll say, they'll find that you're the CEO of Ziff Davis. But if they keep digging, as I did, they'll find there's way more to your story than that. You left Time Incorporated as a 36-year-old rising star in 2010 to lead a buyout of Ziff Davis, a media company that operated 9 technology websites, including PCMag.com. And so when you announced the deal as a new CEO, you told the New York Times that 3 aspects of Ziff Davis appealed to you. I don't know if you remember this or not. The company was already digital. It had vertical, specialized content, and it had a large market of people looking to buy something. So that was back in 2010 when you bought Ziff Davis with some private equity backing. I'd love to start by asking you to bring us up to date. Where is Ziff Davis today in terms of scope, earnings, and growth?
Yeah, so we might have even exaggerated. I think in 2010, while there were 9 properties, there really just was one, and it was PCMag.com. So at the time, we had, I want to say, about 50 employees, revenues a little under 20 million a year. Today, the company does close to 1.4 billion of revenue, and we have 4,000 employees. So, and we're certainly much more than PC Mag. We've got dozens of great brands, digital media and internet brands that are now part of the company.
How much of this vast enterprise did you have in mind in 2010 when you took it over?
Yeah, none of it. I mean, look, when I did that deal, there were very particular reasons. None of this was what I had in mind. It was really, I had been at one company, as you know, a great company, but I'd been at one company my entire professional career. I was 36 years old, and I'd gotten some advice, which was, hey, there's such a thing as being maybe somewhere too long, and you start to become potentially unemployable anywhere else. And so I got that advice. I also got the advice that it's often better to work for some equity, right? So you can work for salary and cash compensation, which is great, and that's what pays the bills. But if you can have an equity interest and put yourself in a position because you've started something or part of buying something, that you could be put into kind of an equity position. So I said that's kind of an interesting thing. But mostly it was, I wanted to prove a certain entrepreneurial skill set. Because while I was at this big company, my job was a very entrepreneurial job for much of it.
Mm-hmm.
But, I don't know if anyone would have categorized me as an entrepreneur when you're inside of one of the largest media companies in the world, Time Warner at the time. And so I felt like for my narrative, taking a risk and doing something like this wasn't actually a risk because it was just changing my story. So I'll be honest, I went into it more thinking about those things, which seemed to be almost a little bit too much about me, but I was thinking about my career. And so the fact that it ended up becoming this larger platform wasn't how I went into it, right? And so to be perfectly honest, it's amazing where it's, where we've come to. but that's not how I was thinking when we started.
So this is fabulous because this is exactly why I wanted to talk to you for the best ever podcast, because you've just laid out or summarized what I've been aware of about you for 20 some years, going on 20 years. And one, I knew for sure that you were a really strong, brilliant business strategist, but I think what you just backed into here was it was really driven by your own personal strategy, right, for yourself. And I want to talk today during our time together about the intersection, really, of those two things. Like how do you manage? How did you manage? How do you manage both present tense and past tense? How have you managed yourself over the years from a strategic perspective so that you can do everything you've accomplished in with Ziff Davis and in the broader business community. So, kind of in the interest of full disclosure, you and I have met. I'm not sure exactly the year, probably 2006 or seven, maybe 2008, somewhere in that range. Uh, and you were one of my not early, but I've been doing this for 24 years now. So, relatively speaking, you were one of my early executive coaching clients when you were president of Fortune magazine. At
Yeah.
Time Inc. was
Yeah.
the thing back then. I remember the lunches we had in the Time Life building on 6th Avenue. Those
That's
were
right.
really fun. And what struck me back then was, I kind of felt like it was the beginning of the end of the big magazine era, and I was so intrigued by being in the building back then, the Time Life building, because it was like this monument
Yeah.
to old school journalism, the pictures on the wall, the bound volumes of magazines. Just remember all that? I'm
Oh
sure
yeah.
you live there
Absolutely.
every day. Of course you do. How did that job come about? I mean, you're in your early 30s and you're a big deal at Time Inc. and the president of Fortune magazine. How'd you end up there?
Well, I have to go back to college. So, because I really was the only place I worked. So how did I get there to begin with? So I was originally planning to go to Singapore on a Fulbright scholarship to go. I was a political science major. I was really interested in this growth triangle that had existed in the region between Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore. So this free trade and free movement of goods and services, this sort of political economy. And so I was going to go to the National University of Singapore to study for a year.
And let's
And
say you were an undergrad at Tufts,
I
right?
was an
So
undergrad at
really
Tufts.
strong on international
Yes.
relations. And is
Yes.
that what you had
And
majored
so,
in as an undergrad, I guess?
yeah, no, that's very much it. And I thought I would probably go into maybe a life of foreign policy, potentially think tank, maybe law. So that was kind of where I was mentally. It just so happened that there was an international incident at the time. An American was caught with doing graffiti and was caned, which was the corporal punishment at the time. That basically put a wrench into me going to Singapore. And so I needed to pivot pretty quickly. But I'm like 4 weeks from graduation. And in those days, and probably even today, all of the recruiting was done, right? So, the jobs that I might have been a candidate for, I wasn't, and they were all closed down. But I went through the process. I was temping. I was doing different things to just, um, earn some money, pay my student loans, and I applied everywhere. I mean, I applied. I have still in my attic a stack this thick. It's about a inch and a half thick of rejection letters, ding letters, as they used to be called,
Yeah.
from every corporate entity you could imagine, right? Because I
And this
just
is
needed a
after you've
job.
got a Fulbright to talk about and you're getting rejected all the
I
time?
mean, but they don't. No one cares. I didn't go. I mean, so
Yeah.
and so
What a coulda, shoulda.
that wasn't impressing anybody.
Yeah.
And so, but one company did call me back, and I remember who did. It was Lynn Griffiths, and she was in recruiting at Time Inc. And I think the reason why she might have responded to me was that when I was at Tufts, I was involved in campus media, on the editorial side, and and had worked with some friends to launch a magazine actually outside of the university for the Boston area. And I included a copy of the magazine in my letter. And so it was in a manila envelope. So I think maybe they were opening manila envelopes more than, normal ones. And so she called and she said, you know what, you come in. And so that was my first, foot in the door. Came in, it was a great conversation, and she said, "You know what? I really think you'd thrive at this company, and so, I wanna introduce you to people." It took 18 interviews before I finally got a job offer, and I think a lot of it had to do with people didn't know where to put me, and, I'm 21 years old at the time, right? I'm a relative baby. And so I got in. But why I tell that whole story is I remember, and I recently read the journal that I kept at the time.
Hmm.
And I remember feeling and saying and thinking, I'm never taking this for granted. This did not come easy. This was hard. By the way, it's a full year later. So
Yeah.
I didn't start until July of 1995. I
Wow.
graduated in May of 1994. So I said, you know what? Whatever happens, I'm going to work as hard as I can. I'm turning the lights on in the morning. I'm turning the lights on off at night. I'm coming in on the weekends. I am not taking this for granted. I'm never going to make Lynn or anyone who took a chance on me feel badly about that chance.
Mhm.
And so I know this sounds like very basic and trite, but I worked really hard.
Yeah.
I worked at a pace and at a level that I don't think was common for someone of my age at that time in that place. And so I just worked really hard. I was never, ever the smartest person in the room. And by the way, Time Inc. had some of the smartest people,
Yeah,
period.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I was in awe of the people I was around. I try to learn, I try to absorb, I try to mimic. I just, I was a student for the 15 years I was there. And so when at 32, they asked me to be president of Fortune and Money and all the business and finance properties. It was a big deal and a proud
Do you
moment.
remember what that felt like? That maybe
I
you
mean,
journaled about it. I'm fascinated that you went back and read your old journal, talk
oh
about that
yeah,
moment.
no, it was yeah, it's great. Like I just felt great. Like and again, credit to Time Inc. because in the end, I'm sure there were a lot of other people waiting in line who had been there longer,
Mhm.
but the decision maker said, "Look, he's proved himself in many ways." I do joke while I was 32, I might have been like 52 if you just added up all the hours I I
Having known
worked,
you at that point, I could vouch for that. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So that's kinda how that happened. Look, there were other epiphanies along the way, like, I realized that, I would define my job as the value that I created that if someone else was in my job, they might not have been able to do, right? Like my value is what is the incremental value? What is the value add? There's the value that comes from doing the work that needs to be done, and then there's the value from doing the work that no one thought needed to be
Mhm.
done, could be done, should be done, and resulted in something. And so I was very much an inventor at the company because that I come to realize you can take something that's there and make it better, and that's great. But if you invent something that was never there before, that's valued even more greatly
What
inside
did
of
you invent that
organizations.
wasn't invented before there? What was the big one?
I think the biggest idea was probably Fortune Americas, which was the concept of taking Fortune magazine, creating a Spanish language and Portuguese language version of the magazines. But instead of launching magazines, going to newspapers throughout Latin America, cutting deals with those newspapers to essentially have the exclusive right in each country to Fortune Americas that they would print, very important, shifted the cost. They would print and distribute. They would be able to sell advertising locally, and we would sell pan regional advertising. And so when we launched Fortune Americas, it was oddly the most widely read and distributed and circulated of any edition of Fortune, including in the United States.
Mm.
So this was something that I had quote unquote invented. I might have been 24 or 25,
Wow.
and so I think I spent I spent a couple of years in the region throughout Latin America, traveling not contiguously, like back and forth.
Mm.
I think we cut 26 deals with newspapers. And so, and in Latin America at the time, the people who owned the newspapers were amongst the most powerful people,
Of
period.
course.
And so
Yeah.
I was very early in my career having the opportunity to be with really accomplished people. And so that was another fascinating. So I got used to that early, right? Like
Okay,
being
so
around.
there's a huge theme here that's breaking through for me, and it's about confidence. And it takes a lot of confidence when you're 24 or 25 to get out there to meet with these probably hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, there's inflation that today they'd be billionaires, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
And the people that you were meeting with all over Latin America, were you really confident? Were you faking it till you made it? Where were you on the spectrum?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I think as a parent of 4 children, and I think often about what I try to imbue, and it's often confidence and empathy because I
Uh-huh.
think they are powerful and important together. I do see myself as, high empathy, empathetic type of person. Confidence is an interesting one because I will say that there's a line between confidence and I think arrogance, and I hope to stay away from that line in my life. So I don't know. I don't know if it was confidence, to be honest. I mean, I think it's willing to take a risk, maybe taking a little bit of a chance, maybe willing to bet on myself. So maybe that's confidence, right?
Uh-huh.
I In none of these endeavors, remember, even the one I talked about, Ziff Davis, I didn't go into it saying this, I'm going to kill it. I just said, I'm going to try. And I guess it's maybe I pick things where the risk of trying was so low that failure wouldn't have been viewed as anything but risk taking in a good way.
Yeah.
So what I didn't say is I launched Fortune Americas, but I don't think I asked for much capital. We bootstrapped it.
Uh-huh.
So even if it didn't happen, kind of maybe consistent with the Ziff story, I guess people might have said, well, look, he tried something. He didn't blow the company's coffers in his attempt. And then if it works, it's like, wow, this thing worked and it was bootstrapped. And so bootstrapping has been the way I've done a lot of these things. Even the Ziff story was bootstrapping. So if I had a lot of confidence, I probably would have asked for $20 million and done something bigger. So I don't know if I've got that. That's probably what a truly confident person would have done.
You had a really good sense of risk and reward, though, didn't you?
Yes.
How much are we willing to risk? What's the potential upside on a relatively small risk?
Yes. I would say then and now, I just love running experiments, trying to just do the smallest effort to learn something.
Mhm.
Right? Versus spend a lot, do a lot, create a lot of time, lots of plans. Just what can we do to just see if our hypothesis, and in that case, the hypothesis was that fortune content in a local language that was global business content would be appealing to a fast growing business community in Latin America.
Mhm.
And that was true. And that, in addition, that there were US based companies looking for an efficient way to reach the entire region. It's hard to market and message to 26 countries at once. So we kind of solved two things, and that was the hypothesis, right? And we were able to, I think, test it without spending a lot. And our construct shifted a lot of the risk, honestly, to the newspapers at the time.
Mhm.
So I guess, in retrospect, I can package it up and it all sounds very strategic.
Well, strategic instincts, it sounds like to me,
Yeah.
right? And so before we leave that part of your life, I wanna take you back to, someone you used to work with at Time Inc. You and I spent some time talking about, I think at that point, he was the editor-in-chief for all of the properties at Time Inc., John Huey. Remember
Yep.
John Huey?
Oh, I love John.
Yeah, amazing. Just such a powerful figure in journalism in the United States. And we found a clip from John. This is like so classic late 90s on the Charlie Rose show. Okay.
Okay.
And he's talking about the magazine business back then. I'd love to just, it's about 30 seconds. Let's play that. And I'd like to get your reaction on the backside.
What makes a great editor is the capacity to do what?
I think it's a fairly, magazine editor is different from a newspaper editor. It's a different game. Newspaper editor, great newspaper editor is different from a great magazine editor. I think magazine editing is a fairly tricky balancing act. You have to be able, it depends on the frequency of your magazine, but you have to be able to sort of see around corners at any of them. If you're editing a weekly, say, Time, you really need to be able to think about what people are going to want to know about next week. And in my case, I need to be able to sort of think ahead a couple weeks and say, what's still going to be alive that's in the ferment of what's going on today? What are they still going to care about 2 weeks from now?
What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, listen, John was the best at what he did, and he's right. Look, he understood shelf life. He understood that frequency dictates like relevance, and so yeah, if you're producing a monthly, it needs to be relevant for a month, right? It can't be something that within 2 days is not, and so you're staying away from probably news, right? And you're looking at different types of pieces, and so he understood content exceedingly well. A funny thing about John is he tells this story that when he first met me, he told a colleague, I think I met my future boss. And so he shared that with me fairly early in my career, I think as encouragement, as just, hey, I think you can go places, kid. So keep at it. And so he was, I mean, when I talk about people at the company that were great, that were generous, I have an immense amount of fondness for Time Inc. in the years I was there. It was a great place.
What was the most important thing you learned from John that stayed with you? This has informed your career and your approach since Time.
You know, the way he would frame things. So just right there, he made, I think he made something that is a complicated process, magazine editing, very simple. But I remember when we were at Fortune, he would say, we want to be the best magazine in the world that happens to be about business. And that just nuance, not the best business magazine, but the best magazine that happens to be about business, is a recasting of the situation that everyone can understand immediately and sets like, oh, so we got to just be the best magazine in the world. Right? And not limit ourselves to just a small category. Let's organize it across a very big category. And so that changes the ambition, and it probably motivates you in a very different way, that you're part of something even bigger. And I think it's really great. Like that kind of thing, trying to frame like the situation you're in. I think about that a lot. Like, what business are we in? What does success look like? Where are we and trying to do it in a way that has everyone more excited and inspired to be part of it. And so that was something people would repeat. And it's an easy thing to repeat. Mantras are great like that. Like, I believe in them because you remember them, you can repeat them, everyone else repeats them, and then it becomes part.
What's the mantra that you say again and again at Ziff Davis?
There are a number of different ones, and because the organization, I mean, it depends. But in the end, for a long time, it was, we're creating a business model for content. Like that's what we're doing. Content and journalism matter. We are seeing then, now, and in the future challenges. Our mission is to create a viable, sustainable business model for content. And I think that helps and resonates where producers of content and salespeople and monetizers and everyone involved sits there and says, okay, there's a bigger goal here. There are even, sort of concepts that I try to reinforce. Perfect is the enemy of the good. That might have also been, that's a famous one, but that might have been a Huey one that I then have adopted. And the purpose there is, I think, like, let's just go. We can keep trying. We can keep iterating. Good is good, right? And we don't have to be perfect in anything that we do, because the pursuit of perfection sometimes slows us. And in the technology business, you can't be slow. Right. There's a velocity and speed with which things are moving that you gotta kind of keep up. So there are all these little, there are little pithy things that, I talk about 3 bites of the apple, that, whatever we're in, like, okay, that's the first bite. That's one thing we do. What are the other 2 bites? Right. And so,
I think we were
things
talking
like
about
that.
that back when I knew you originally. 3 bites of the apple. That's a long one with you, I think.
Yeah.
So speaking of, your kind of personal approach, I want to shift over the next 10 minutes or so to, as we begin to move toward the close of the conversation, just some personal strategies. We've talked a little bit about this already, but the way I'm really interested in routines or habits that you have in your life that you think enable you, one, to be a really successful business leader. But also, I know you mentioned you have 4 children. I remember we've talked about that in the past, how important your family life is to you and your kids are. I think you were thinking of the Yankees games at an early age, if I remember right.
Yeah.
So I just want to hear the way I think about routines, Vivek, is I think about them in 4 buckets: physical routines, mental routines that help keep you kind of mentally acute and sharp, relational routines, the way you manage your relationships and routines that help with that, and then spiritual routines that keep you connected with your sense of purpose and things like that. Any of those 4 resonate with you more than others?
I mean, I think they all do. We all have roles, right? And so, CEO of a company, that's a role. A father of 4 children, that's a role. A husband to an amazing wife, that's a role. Um, a son to parents who thankfully are still with us, it's a role.
Mhm.
A brother, brother-in-law, son-in-law, friend. These are all things that I value each, try to be great at each, don't confuse one with the other, and don't bring maybe the feelings of one into another, and I try to keep them, I try not to let things that may be challenging in business affect my role as a father, right? And vice versa and all that kind of stuff. The family roles that I talked about are at the top of the list, right? That's what we're all here for, in my opinion, and that can't be put below. And I'm very proud of the fact that that's never been subjugated in my experience, and that's hopefully, and that's a privilege, right? That's not, a lot of people don't always have that choice.
Yeah.
Like things happen that force them to maybe jigger that, but I've been lucky that way. So I think about those roles and how can I be the best in those roles. Physically, I'm a big squash player, so that's something I enjoy doing. And it's for those who don't know the sport, it's an amazing sport because it's one that is physically demanding. It is one that is mentally taxing. There's just a lot of thought that goes into it. It's like chess on a court, and you have to be thinking multiple moves ahead. And so I love the game. And it's something my boys play and my youngest daughter is now playing. I've been involved with, and it's a great thing. So squash is a great
And
outlet
just
for
to interrupt
me.
for a second, I talk a lot with my clients and write a lot about this, and the writing that I do is that I think some routines can be high leverage, and it sounds like squash is a really high leverage routine for you because you're getting the physical and the mental benefits. You're also getting the relational benefits, right? Because you
Yes.
brought your kids into it, and
Yes.
that's a pretty cool example of a high leverage routine.
It is, and it's fun and it's actually a fun game to play with someone. You're in a box together,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're actually, you're not, it's kind of an interesting dynamic. I don't know how many other games are quite like that.
Do you see a connection between squash and your strategic acumen?
No, because my squash game is not good enough.
Should there be a connection between
Yeah,
the two?
I need to be a better squash player to connect the two. I think I may
Yeah.
be better practitioner of business than I am of squash, but
Uh-huh.
there's still time for me.
Yeah, definitely. So physical is squash for you, and I was going to ask you this at the end. I'll ask you now. Why is it that 15 years or so after we worked together, you look pretty much the same, and I look like an old man.
No, I was, I feel
What
like,
are you doing physically that, in addition to squash, that's keeping you healthy? And there's a big mind-body connection, obviously.
yeah, well, maybe the mental part of this, which I would say the other thing that I do, that I try to do in the context of my life and my business and my family and all these pieces is maintain proportionality. And I stress this all the time. You can't make small things big.
Hmm.
Just can't.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, and it's like there's a famous book by this, and nearly everything is small,
Mm-hmm. Don't sweat the small stuff, right?
right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's true. And so you have to look at things in a broader context, which I do. And so, people tell me here I take bad news well. It's not that I like bad news. It's that in the end, I don't know if I characterize it as bad as others might, because to me, there's real bad news in the world.
Mm-hmm.
A weak sales number is really not one of them. Like if you, inside of one company of many, it's like I think maintaining proportionality is so important. And it's hard. I think, I see it on athletic fields and at schools and the pressure kids are under. Like I see it with kids, right? Like everything feels so so big, so
Uh-huh.
immense.
Uh-huh.
I think that's hard to deal with mentally if that's how you go
Yeah,
through
you
life.
remind me of there's a book that Susie Welch, who was married to Jack
Yep.
Welch and was the editor of the Harvard Business Review for a number of years. She wrote a book several years ago called 10-10-10.
Hmm.
And the premise was basically, will this event matter 10 days from now, 10 weeks, 10 months from now, or 10 years from now?
Right.
It's kind of the proportionality. Do you have a rubric or a framework a mantra, you used that word earlier, that you keep in mind to just check yourself on how much something actually matters?
I don't, but I may use this 10-10-10 because it sounds
Feel
pretty
free.
good. Like that's a good, it's a great way to think about it. No, I mean, listen, I think in the end, I think it's less about categorizing and it's more about just saying that in the end, keep all of these things in context. They'll work out. Give it time and space. You're going to get to a solution, and all is not lost. I don't get to a sense of hopelessness. I think that's the thing. It's like not getting to this point of there's no hope, right? For whatever it is. And you want to stay away. You don't want to get anywhere close to that zone, I think, in anything you do. You don't want to think, you look in sports, right? I mean, the great ones, it's not over until it's over, right? It's not lost, and they'll push and they'll try and they'll carve and they're not out of it and they'll leave the last point behind. The last point does not influence the next point. Short memories, Mariano Rivera, the Yankee great. I mean, probably the best at this. He could blow a game. Next game, it was like it never happened. And I just think he maintained proportionality. He's like, okay, there's always another game.
Yeah.
And I'll win the next one.
You're reminding me of so many things I think about, that there's a definition of leadership that I love. And I think it came from Napoleon, that a leader's job is basically two things. The first is to define reality, and the second is to offer hope.
Mm.
And, when you talk about there's always another play, that's the
Yeah.
hope part. If you think about the way you parent, the way you lead a business, the way you engage with the nonprofits you're involved
Yeah.
in, how do you balance the ratio of reality and hope? Like, how do you think about that?
You try to connect the two, right? So it's not a balance. It's that if we understand the current state and are clear-eyed about it, and then have an optimistic, productive view of where we can go, you've connected the two, right? And so they're not disconnected. Hope is a function of the present state, right? So the future state is going to be a function of this. And so how do you connect that and give people the view towards, okay, it can be better? And that's what people want. They just want better, right? That's ultimate. We don't want worse. We want better. And then we can debate how much better and when better, but we want better. And so to me, if you can be clear on where we are and that there are paths to better, and here's what we're going to need to do, I think people get it. And this has been important in our business because we haven't talked about this, but the truth of the matter is that while I came out of the magazine business that was under an enormous amount of pressure from the internet and digital forces, we are in a place now where you have all sorts of pressures. You have AI pressures, and you have the oligopoly in advertising. A few large companies that seem to be
Getting
hoovering
even more,
in.
even
Yeah,
more of that coming up, right?
and so you have to carve out for and as you know, many journalism-oriented organizations are not doing well. And so, we've been bucking the trend and we've done well, but we have not operated in what I would call an easy environment. So this has been, a challenging environment for us in which to operate. And so the thing we're talking about right now is actually very relevant, which is, we are winning and can win and will continue to win because that's what ultimately I think most people want. I think they want to be part of a winning organization and team.
hmm when I listen to everything you're sharing, it sounds completely authentic. I mean, you come across completely authentic, and I could understand how somebody listening to us could think, "Gosh, has this guy ever had a setback?" You know, or has his trajectory just been straight up and to the right with no variation? When have you had a setback, and what do you do to get yourself back on track when you have a setback?
Well, listen, I think the first setback was where it all started, right? I thought I was going to
Yeah.
Singapore and all that. And that was hard for me. I was depressed. I mean, if, at the time I didn't, but, and I was rereading some of my notes. I'm like, ooh, I wasn't in a great place, right? It was hard because I'd just gone to this expensive college and, we didn't come from, we didn't have the means of taking these loans and like, how did this happen? Right. So, it very much was informing. So, there have been other things, but it was the thing that set me down a very clear path of where I, felt like I needed to be, which to this day, I don't take any job, any responsibility for granted.
I love that.
I don't. Not even for a second. And I will tell you, when we did the Ziff deal, everyone thought I was bananas and nuts, and this was a bad career move, and it was risky, and I was putting my own money in it. And, we just, had twins, and so we had 302. Like it was not it worked out, but at the time it felt dangerous.
I bet a lot
I
of people
thought,
didn't even understand what you're trying to do back then, did they?
no,
Yeah.
no.
So,
And
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 so you've had this vision that was clear to you at some level, obviously, or you wouldn't be doing it. Probably, I would guess 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10. I don't know what the ratio is, but probably a majority of the people that you were talking with or about this thing, oh my gosh, what are you doing, right? How do you how do you manage yourself when you've got a vision that's clear to you, but you're getting a lot of pushback that, oh my gosh, that's not a great idea or not a thing for you to
Well, I
do.
think you wanna hear why it's not a great idea because you'll learn from it and you'll try to manage those. Those could be the obstacles, those could be the hurdles. So you don't wanna dismiss that. You wanna say, "Okay, but why? What do you think's wrong? Where do you think this is not gonna work?" And then maybe even try to get them to say, "All right, well, to play devil's advocate, get the other side of that. How would you make it work?" So I think anyone that's interested in offering you an opinion about anything you're gonna do, take the opinion, but go deeper and understand things. And so, I was told early that, capital was going to be hard and I'd never raised capital and that kind of thing. And so when I went to do the Ziff deal, the way I did it was I found the asset that we wanted to buy and then went to seek money. Not I went to money and say, "Hey, help me do something," right? Like
Uh-huh.
so there was just an ordering thing. So as you heard critics, one critic and I that was because a critic told me this actually. When I first started this process, I was first talking to private equity firms and look, here's who I am. I'm interested. I've got this thesis around taking a magazine business and turning it into digital. Back me. And then one person said to me, he's like, listen, no one's going to tell you this. I'm going to tell you this. You're a dime a dozen. There's nothing unique. What would be unique is if you came in here and showed me something I hadn't seen before, an actual deal. Then we could talk about the deal and by extension, you and what you would do with it. And that was great advice, right? Like
Yeah.
it was, I would have gone on probably meeting lots of private equity people and not having anyone tell me that and maybe not get anywhere. And he said, go find a deal. Spend your time, find a deal, then come call us.
Yeah.
And he was right, because then the conversation switched. It's like, oh, I've got a deal. Oh, you do? Tell me about it. How'd you find it? Like, that's unique. That's different. And that matches to their needs, not mine. And then there was never a question of who's going to run it. I brought the deal. It's my deal. So that's an example of where, if good critics are actually going to tell you something that'll allow you to adjust. And if they don't, I think you can, interrogate a little bit to get to, well, why do they think this isn't a great idea?
Yeah, perfect. So I've got 3 questions I want to wrap up with. One is kind of a circle back question, and then 2 to kind of close us out. The circle back question, you mentioned this twice now, once towards the beginning of the conversation and just a few minutes ago when I was asking about setbacks. You journal, or at least you used to journal, and you've kept your journals. And so I'm intrigued by what prompted you to go back and read old journals from whatever year that was, 2007 or 8 or thereabouts.
Yeah.
And what role has journaling played in informing your personal perspective over the years? Just what have the benefits been of that to you?
Yeah, no. So the reason I was keeping a journal, I think at the time, and I've been inconsistent with it, so I don't want to position myself as being devoted to it. But I think in moments where I feel like I needed to document my state, my feeling, it was just, at that time, coming out of college, not having a job, not having something to do, I felt like I needed to chronicle. And the reason I went back to it was I now have children entering that phase of life, and reminding myself of what it was like then, so that maybe I can be better as, a supporter and as a father, and didn't do that. So I really just wanted to go back to what was the mind of the 21-year-old version of me. And when I looked at it, I was like, "Ooh, that was a tough time for me." But it also then had the benefit of just, again, reminding me of how lucky I am and all this great stuff that I get to do. I talk a lot about just being lucky, because when I go back to other points where I jotted things down, luck is such a big part of this.
Mhm.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it's a little unsettling, to be honest, right? And I just go through my life about how moments just broke my way. It had nothing to do with anything I did.
Well, the
You know?
classic kind of hackneyed definition of luck is when preparation meets opportunity, right? I mean, does that apply to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of luck as the residue of design. So there's some design, right? But again, the reason why I express the luck piece so much is that it's another reminder for me. It's just another way. It keeps you grounded, humble. I'm not in this job because I was the best person for this job. That's not true.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just not.
fair enough. So your reflection on going back to your journals, because your kids are now the age you were when you were journaling those pages, kind of leads to the next to last question, which is, what's your one best piece of advice for anybody listening who is interested in being a more effective strategist, either at a personal level, at an organizational level? Just one thing you've learned about being strategic that you would pass on to the listener?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's all about pattern recognition. So what I've done well in business is I expose myself to lots of things in and outside of business, and then I look for patterns, and I can see things in one place that have absolutely, seemingly nothing to do with my business, and say, well, wait a minute, that dynamic actually can play itself here. So it's 2 things. It's being curious and learning as much as you can. And right now, this is the age for the curious. I mean, with AI and the potential to access knowledge, curiosity will get rewarded. So be hyper and ultra curious, and then recognize that there are patterns. And so look for the patterns that you could say, wow, well, how can that business, connect here? I've always tried to understand how something works from a business point of view. More precisely, how does this make money? I'm always fascinated by this. Like, how does that make money? And when you learn how that makes money, you may say, well, you know what? That can make me money here. And so that has been really helpful for me. So I love to read. I love to study. I love to hear about things, right? I'm like, well, how does that work? And what do you do here? And tell me about your business. And so if you're that kind of person, and you'd be amazed how much people would love to talk about their businesses. They'll talk to you about it. If you show curiosity, they're going to talk to you about it, and you're going to learn something.
Follow-up question that I'm going to sneak in. Does pattern recognition apply to parenting as well?
It may, it's hard, right? Like it's, with parenting, I find kids are different and situations are different, and what works with one may
Yeah,
not
for
work
sure.
with another. And then, I'm careful not to bring, the rules of business to the rules of the house. You say, that they not, you certainly don't want to be CEO in the house like that. That's not good. That doesn't work. Uh-uh.
Yeah, you don't have shareholders there,
No.
right? You have stakeholders, not shareholders.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, very good. So last question is kind of a fun one that we're going to ask everybody on the show. What is in your ears lately? What are you listening
What am I
to that's in your
listening to?
ears?
I've been listening to a bunch of podcasts all across the board, mostly media business, sort of like, Pivot with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. Peter Kafka just has a new podcast. I listen
Right.
to his. I'm a huge R.E.M. fan,
Oh,
and so
yeah.
there's been a ongoing deep podcast on R.E.M. and their
What's the name of that?
discography. And I'm gonna look it up
All right,
now
sorry.
because I just know it as my R.E.M. podcast here. It's right here in my library. It's called A Music Podcast About R.E.M.
That's some brilliant branding right there.
But I think it's from a larger podcast called What Is Music. So I think they do
Okay.
What Is Music, and they've just done a series on R.E.M., but they go deep,
Uh-huh.
deep, deep. So,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
All right, cool. So do you like Stevie Wonder?
I do.
The Wonder of Stevie. Have you listened to that?
No.
It's by Wesley Morris, the cultural critic for the New York Times.
Yeah.
And it's about the golden era of Stevie Wonder, like Talking Book and Songs in the Key of Life and those albums. It is fascinating. It's fascinating.
All right. I got to add that to my,
After when you're done with R.E.M., you can move on to Stevie.
yeah, exactly.
That's my gift to you for talking to me for
Oh,
an
I
hour.
appreciate that. I appreciate it.
Vivek, this has been such a pleasure, to catch up with you, but two, just to learn from you. And I appreciate so much you sharing your wisdom and your experience with me and with our listeners, and wish you
And
all the best.
I can't let us end without saying that you didn't ask this. I was hoping you would, but
Oh, yeah.
I learned a lot from you as my coach. And I remember a lot of things from that, but really I remember you would join me in meetings, right? And you would talk about, just leave some oxygen in the room. There were things there that, were really helpful, like, almost holding back. What you don't do matters as much as what you do. When you do speak and don't speak, and understanding that, which was super helpful to me then, and I still use today.
Well, that is so generous and gracious of you to say that. Thank you. I can't tell you how much it means to me to hear that. It really does.
No, it was, and I, by the way, talk about our coaching experience when I encourage individuals here to think about having a coach and how it can be helpful, because, there are times people think that might be a criticism, and it's certainly not. It's actually advocating and saying, hey, we see a lot here, and this is an investment in you.
Perfect. An investment in you. That's a great way to end. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Scott.
It's been a pleasure and a joy to talk with you again. Thank you.
Likewise.
So, coachable moments from my conversation with Vivek. Several things stand out for me. The first is the whole concept of risk and reward. A lot of leaders I've worked with over the years, especially rising leaders, like in our group coaching program for high potential leaders, I've said to so many groups of leaders like that, I think you folks have your risk and reward ratio out of whack. And what I mean by that is, especially rising leaders, maybe not so much senior leaders, but sometimes even senior leaders, tend to underestimate the rewards of taking a risk, and they overestimate risk. And usually the rewards are greater than people think, and the risks are less than people think. And Vivek learned early on in his career how to think about and manage risk when he told the story in the episode about starting Fortune Americas, which turned out to be the most profitable and widely read version of Fortune magazine there was back in the day when Fortune magazine was still a magazine, like a printed magazine. He talked a lot about bootstrapping, that his idea was to leverage the Fortune brand in 26 countries in Latin America, but offload the financial risk to like local newspaper editor or local newspaper owners in the region, because most of them were people of means, a lot of money. And it's like, it was a brilliant example of taking a small risk for what ended up being a really big reward, both for Time Incorporated, but also for Vivek, right? Because that was kind of what made his bones. He was 24 years old at that point with Time Inc. And he went and did this crazy thing, seemingly crazy, but not to him, because it was a small risk. Like there was really very little financial risk to Time Incorporated in Vivek taking that bet, placing that bet, but the payoffs are huge. And so I just really appreciate the way he thinks about it, because frankly, it aligns a lot with what I've said to my clients over the years about the way they think about their risk and reward ratios. Another big coachable moment for me from the conversation was his whole point about maintaining proportionality. We talked about how do you deal with bad news? And he said, people feel like I handle bad news really well. And he said, the secret is I don't think most bad news is really that big a deal on bad news. The missing your sales number for one quarter, he said, like, that isn't that big a deal compared to the actual legitimate bad news that's going on any given day in the world. There's an old story I like to tell about the punchline. I won't bore you with this story, but the punchline is good thing, bad thing, who knows? You never really know in the moment how an outcome in that moment is going to play out in the longer run. It could be a good thing, a bad thing. The whole point really is who knows? And so, keeping that perspective that he referenced the old book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And the subtitle of the book was, and it's all small stuff. I loved his point about maintaining proportionality. Another one played right into one of my favorite things that I love to talk about with leaders. I've written about a lot over the years. It's my favorite definition of leadership. It comes in two parts. I talked about this in the conversation. Part one of the leader's job is to define reality. Part two is to offer hope. And Vivek, I think, is a master of that. I think it probably relates back to the previous point about maintaining your perspective and your proportionality. Vivek is a lot like Dane Blanton, the gold medal Olympian and four-time consecutive national championship winning coach at USC's women's volleyball. Dane talked in his conversation for Best Ever about, you got to move on to the next play. Vivek is totally that way, right? He's always focused on what's next? What's the next play? Yeah. What have we learned from this one? Great. How can we apply that to the next one? And so that's really kind of the sweet spot between defining reality and offering hope. I asked him to think about it, articulate it a little bit more. And what's it mean to you to define reality and to offer hope? And I love the way he framed it, like understanding the current state, that's the reality, and then presenting an optimistic view of where we can go. Like the next play is going to be a better play. Let's go. And then finally, the last coachable moment that really resonated with me, because I've seen the power of it so much in my own life and in lives of many of the folks that I've worked with over the years, is the power of a practice like journaling. If you remember, Vivek talked in the episode, it took him a year after he graduated from Tufts, not a slouch school, Tufts, pretty good school. Thought he had a Fulbright scholarship. That fell through. And then he spent a year looking for a job, and he had that stack of rejection letters, that were an inch and a half thick back in the day. And he just kept working it until he got, Time Incorporated took a flyer on him as a 21-year-old. And he talked about, I went back and I was reading my journal the other night from when I was 21. and what I was going through at that point in my life. That, wow, that's fascinating, because I do that too. Like I go back and I look at my old journals from time to time. And I said, why'd you do that? He said, well, because now I have 21-year-olds. I think he has twins. I think they're both 21. And, they're entering that phase of adulthood. And I just wanted to remember what it was like for me, when I was their age. And so I could be a better dad, be a better parent to them now. And it struck me during the conversation and then after the conversation, that journal from when he was 21 years old, and he's got a bunch of other volumes since then, obviously, that journal is like a coach, to him. And like, he can go back and read that and get coached by the 21-year-old version of himself in a way, to help him remember what it was like to be a 21-year-old. And I think journaling has so many benefits. There's a reflective benefit in the moment where you can just process, like what's going on in your life. And that's a really valuable thing to do. But then if you keep them and look at them later, you can really, we talked about this in the conversation, you can see the patterns. You can see the pattern recognition. And in his case, maybe use it to help somebody else in your life, So I just thought that was really cool. So thoroughly enjoyed catching up with Vivek Shah almost 20 years after I was his coach back at Fortune Magazine. A lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to follow Best Ever on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review and a comment on this episode. I want to know what's landing with you, and your engagement really helps others discover the show. And if you're looking for more on how self-management fuels lasting leadership impact, connect with me through evelingroup.com. I've learned it takes a village to make a podcast. Thanks to executive producer Cece Huffman and editor Mark Meyer, both of Wavestream Media. And thanks to my other team members, Lindsay Russell, Mary Moats, Sophia Shum, and Diane Eblin. Best Ever is a production of the Eblin Group. Thanks for listening to Best Ever. And until next time, keep taking those small steps that lead to your best ever outcomes.